Aston Martin's 2026 season has produced one finish inside the points and one finish at all that did not end in a retirement or a double mechanical failure. That is not a typo. After Barcelona's double technical breakdown left both Alonso and Stroll struggling to even match the Cadillacs in qualifying, the team has effectively stopped pretending the current car is going to get meaningfully better. Lawrence Stroll did not react the way team owners usually react to a season this bad. He held back. Because the real verdict on the AMR 26 was delivered months ago, and it was delivered by the car's own design team. Adrian Newey just confirmed it. Aston Martin is rebuilding almost the entire 2026 car. Not a new front wing, not a revised floor. The chassis, the suspension architecture, the bodywork, the cooling, everything except the front suspension geometry is being thrown out and redesigned from a blank sheet. That is not a mid-season upgrade. That is a team admitting, in the most concrete way possible, that the car Newey signed his name to in February was fundamentally wrong. And the most interesting part of this story is not the rebuild itself. It is that two separate sets of credible reports cannot agree on when it actually arrives, which tells you something important about how chaotic this recovery effort still is behind closed doors at Silverstone. To understand why Aston Martin is rebuilding nearly everything, you have to understand exactly how dysfunctional the first half of this season has been. The entire premise of the Honda partnership was integration, chassis and power unit designed together, perfectly harmonized, the philosophy behind every works partnership in Formula One history. Instead, the AMR 26 and the Honda RA626H have spent 6 months fighting each other. The power unit's vibrations have been severe enough that Newey described the risk to drivers in stark terms, Alonso and Stroll reporting symptoms serious enough that the team genuinely discussed whether prolonged exposure could cause long-term nerve damage. In Australia, Aston Martin arrived with 4 batteries. 2 were pulled from circulation after first practice due to conditioning issues caused by the vibration. With 2 batteries left and no further supply possible, Newey called the situation quite a scary place to be in, and a double retirement was the expected outcome before a wheel had even turned in anger. China brought a retirement when the vibrations became too uncomfortable to continue. It was not until Japan, Honda's home race, that Aston Martin recorded its first finish of the season, Alonso bringing the car home 18th, a lapped finish that the team nonetheless treated as a genuine milestone. Barcelona then delivered a double technical failure that left both cars struggling to match the Cadillacs in qualifying on a circuit completely different in character from Monaco, the race before. Aston Martin's own trackside chief Mike Crack made the diagnosis explicit. Monaco and Barcelona were completely different circuits, slow and twisty against fast and flowing, and the team was uncompetitive at both. That is not a circuit-specific weakness, that is a car that needs improvement everywhere. The scale of what Newey is rebuilding deserves to be stated plainly, because it is unusual, even by the standards of a difficult Formula One season. According to motorsport.com, Italy's Franco Nunez, the new car will be entirely redesigned with the single exception of the front suspension geometry. Everything else, the chassis structure, the bodywork, the cooling architecture that has already been modified once this season with extra vents to help the struggling Honda power unit breathe, and critically the rear suspension concept is being rebuilt from a blank sheet. The rear suspension detail matters more than it might first appear. Aston Martin's new approach is reportedly drawing on engineering concepts not expected to become common across the grid until the 2027 regulation cycle. Meaning Newey's team is not simply fixing what went wrong with the AMR 26, they are attempting to leapfrog directly toward ideas the rest of the paddock has not yet implemented. That is either an enormous opportunity or an enormous risk, depending on whether the concept translates from the wind tunnel to the track without the same kind of integration failures that defined the first half of the season. Newey has been explicit that the team deliberately chose not to bring piecemeal updates to early races this year. Rather than spending development resources chasing marginal gains on a car whose fundamentals were already compromised, Maranello's rival to the north decided to absorb the pain of a lost first half of the season and direct everything toward a single, comprehensive reset. The technical leadership behind that reset has been reinforced specifically for this project, Newey working closely with technical director Enrico Cardilli, while former Mercedes personnel Jack Vino and Duncan Elliott have been brought into the structure. This is not a department running on the same staff that produced the AMR 26. It is a strengthened technical organization attempting to prove that this season's results say more about a flawed starting concept than about the people now tasked with fixing it. A new chassis alone does not solve Aston Martin's problem, because the data suggests roughly 2 seconds of their deficit to the front of the grid comes directly from the Honda power unit rather than the chassis around it. That is where the ADUO system becomes critical. Honda has been granted upgrade opportunities under the same FIA framework, helping Ferrari and Mercedes close their own deficits, and the explicit target is recovering at least half of the power currently missing compared to rivals. Honda's engineers have also made tangible progress on the vibration problem itself, testing at Sakura with the engine connected to an actual chassis on the dyno, rather than relying solely on track running, allowed far more comprehensive sensor data than was possible before. Honda's project lead Orihara described finding good progress on both the battery side and the vibrations the driver feels, incremental but real improvement on the fault line that has defined this partnership's reputation since pre-season testing first exposed it. Here is where the story gets genuinely uncertain, and it deserves to be treated honestly rather than smoothed over. Reports from BBC sources, relayed through Motorbiscuit days ago, suggest the chassis and engine upgrades are being deliberately staggered, the comprehensive chassis overhaul arriving around the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, with Honda's critical power unit revision following later at Zandvoort. That timeline would mean Aston Martin spends an entire race weekend running a brand new chassis behind the same underpowered, vibration-prone engine that has defined their season, followed by a separate weekend integrating a new power unit into a chassis that has already been on track without it. Other reporting, including Italian sources and the team's own public framing around Hungary, describes both elements arriving together as a single unified package. Both versions cannot be correct. What is consistent across every source is that the team is treating Austria, Britain, and Belgium as effectively transitional races, circuits to manage rather than circuits to fight at, with the genuine new season beginning whenever this rebuilt car and updated engine actually reach the grid together. Drop a comment. Do you think the upgrades arrive together, or does Aston Martin's recovery get delayed even further by a staggered rollout? It is worth being honest about what Aston Martin is actually targeting here, because the ambition is deliberately modest compared to where Newey's arrival was supposed to take this team. Nobody inside Silverstone is talking about podiums or championship contention for the second half of 2026. The stated goal is climbing out of the back of the grid and becoming a team that fights for points on a regular basis. Given where the season started, a car that occasionally could not complete a Grand Prix distance, a power unit Newey himself said was emanating vibrations severe enough to risk driver health, and a chassis that Alonso described without contradiction from his own team as the worst on the grid, reaching that target would represent genuine progress rather than the disappointment it would be for almost any other operation on the grid. The risk profile here is significant in both directions. If the rebuilt chassis and Honda's ADUO-supported engine integrate as cleanly as the team is hoping, Aston Martin could move from fighting Cadillac for 19th to genuinely contesting the midfield within a handful of races, a swing large enough to reshape the Constructors' Championship picture in the second half of the season. If the staggered rollout reported by BBC sources proves accurate, or if the new rear suspension concept introduces integration problems of its own, the team risks compounding this season's lost development time with a second wave of teething issues at exactly the point when rivals are deploying their own ADUO-supported upgrades. Mercedes is fighting a battery reliability crisis. Ferrari is bringing engine upgrades to Austria. Red Bull and McLaren continue developing aggressively. Aston Martin's entire competitive recovery is riding on a single, concentrated bet that throwing out almost the entire car was the correct call rather than compounding a difficult season with an even more difficult one. Subscribe to F1 Perspective. We will have the answer the moment this car reaches the track. Adrian Newey has built championship-winning cars at 4 different teams across 4 decades. He has also, by his own admission, never inherited a power unit partnership this dysfunctional, this late into a season. The decision to rebuild almost the entire AMR26 rather than chase incremental fixes is either going to be remembered as the moment Aston Martin's project found its footing, or as confirmation that even Formula One's most decorated designer cannot fully compensate for a power unit that spent 6 months fighting its own chassis instead of working with it. What happens next depends on a question nobody outside Silverstone and Sakura can currently answer with certainty: whether the new chassis and Honda's revised engine arrive together as one coherent package, or whether Aston Martin spends consecutive race weekends running half-finished solutions while rivals consolidate their own gains. Mike Crack already told us what the diagnosis looks like. The car needs improvement everywhere, on every type of circuit. Newey's answer to that diagnosis is now built. Whether it arrives whole or in pieces is the question that determines whether 2026's second half becomes a recovery story or simply a longer version of its first. All eyes are on Newey because at this point in the season there is genuinely nobody else left for Aston Martin to look to.